currently founder. Oh, sorry, there's a bug here. Apologies. The one time I get to be on a screen, and apologies. But essentially, I am founder and CEO of DEI Labs. That is an organization that helps HR and talent individuals receive training and development, specifically within the DEI space. Prior to starting this organization, I started working in social equity in 2011. That took me down the path of working in talent and HR. I've been in talent and HR for almost 15 years. I'm one of LinkedIn's top global talent acquisition voices, and I'm just thrilled to be here. I will say my very first company I ever started prior to DEI Labs was an organization called Resume Writing. So helping the individual consumer speak the language of hiring managers and being a translation vessel for people's experience and how that quantifies and qualifies into what is relevant for our open roles was my very first love language and my very first bread and butter. So I am very excited to be here with all of you today. Essentially the setup for today, it's super casual. I really love a lot of input and all the different things. So please feel free to add in anything that you would like as we go, and I will try to answer anything we have. But essentially, I'm just going to go over a few quick 5 tips that I suggest for anyone for their resume, and then a few quick 5 tips for anyone that's interviewing. So we can go ahead and get started since we only have, I think, 50 minutes left here. So let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. Okay, y'all are going to see my secret. It's Canva, y'all. All right, can everyone see my screen? I cannot actually see you if you can, but if one person could give me a thumb up and yes, we can. All right, cool beans. All right, so this is our resume writing session. We only have 3 things on the topic today, and that is the 5 rules of interviewing and the 5 rules of resumes. And we will get started. I also see these are out of order, so I apologize. All right, what are the rules of a resume? What is it that really, really matters whenever you're presenting yourself and basically creating a 1-page slick as to why you are the best person for this? It is your 1-page Tinder profile. It is your shoot your shot as to why you are a fit for this role. That is what a resume is. And the entire encompassing, I guess you could say, feature of that is knowing your audience well enough to know what will catch their eye. So we will go through that here. The second portion that we'll be going through is the rules of the interview. So once you catch an organization's eye, once they reach out and they say, hey, your resume meets the mark, we would love to talk further about your qualifications. How do you actually get through that door? And what does that look like? Another thing I will say, if you are adding questions, I can't see the comments, so please, Katie, I don't know, I know you have to leave in a few minutes, but if you'll just let me know if there are any as we go. Okay, so first and foremost, the resume rules. The number 1 resume rule that I would highly suggest is relevancy. Relevancy is the number 1 key on the resume. If the resume is not relevant to my needs, I will not continue reading it. I'm sure everyone in the room has read the statistics that recruiters, hiring managers look at resumes for anywhere from 30 seconds or less. That is accurate. Whenever you are looking at 600 resumes at a time in a Tinder swipe format, by the way, that is always how, not always, but typically how traditional ATSs do it. So you can have a consistent assessment process, if you will. So what is the most important thing is relevancy. So what I base that on is the organization. What skills do you have that can contribute to the organization as a whole? This has to do with industry. So for instance, if you're applying for a role in tech, your experience in that industry is important. It's relevant. The other thing is the actual open role itself. You need to have as much relevancy to that role as possible, meaning that perhaps if you don't have the organization or industry background or knowledge to support relevancy there, do it primarily with the open role. A lot of people don't necessarily have the industry experience, but they have the open role experience. And that's the number one relevancy that I would say is important here, is making sure that you can take the skills that you have, that you've performed in the past, and translate them to what is needed for the client and why it matters. Another thing to do with relevancy is not only to say why it matters, but why your skills are the most beneficial for that. There are lots of instances where I have actually seen individuals from the military or other areas where they say, hey, I see that you need a sales leader, you need a sales this. Let me tell you why the skills that I learned in the military actually translate and become exactly the nest egg that you need to be able to perform this role. Being able to do that translation process for your recruiters, because remember, they're looking at this for 30 seconds. So it needs to be in the language that they speak. So translating this with as much relevancy as possible is very important. The last relevancy on there is going to be who may be assessing. So this goes to specifically what department are you applying into? If it's sales, they're going to want to see your quota. They're going to want to see your data. If it's engineering, they're going to want to see what languages that you've developed. They're going to want to see what environments you've worked in, what cloud bases. So the things about who would be assessing you and what they would care about, if it's a CTO or if it is a director of engineering, anytime that you can get a paper in front of them, just make sure if you know it's going to them to make sure that it's relevant. So again, harping on it a lot, but it is the most important thing. I cannot stress this enough, is relevancy, because you've got to make it past the 30 seconds. That's hit number one. That is the number one task. Once you've decided what is relevant to this organization, this role, and this audience, you need to prioritize it. Meaning that look at their job description and see what they've put as their first bullet points. That is typically what their largest need is. Usually the things that are the biggest hits are right there at the top. So if they're saying we need someone that has done Kubernetes, Docker, etc., those are the skill sets that need to be at the top. Again, we care about what's relevant. However, if you can align your skill set with what my largest gaps are, now you've pushed me past my 30 seconds. Now I'm going to keep looking at your resume. I'm also going to take a pause just to look at the comments to see if there's anything, because I realize I am, just talking on, but I don't see there's anything, so cool beans. All right, the third most important piece is going to be the aesthetic. So this is the readability of the resume itself. You will hear several individuals saying one-sheeter for resumes. I will say I suggest it. I don't necessarily draw a line. There are lots of recruiters who are like, if you go over one page, it's a waste of your time. I don't necessarily think that, depending on, again, the relevancy, prioritization, and who will be assessing. I will say in the engineering space, I have actually seen CTOs, they're much more analytical. They want to see more. So I know a lot of recruiters draw that very hard and firm line, and it might be taboo for me to say it's not the worst, just depending on your audience. There are certain fields where less is more, I would say sales. And then there are certain fields where if you don't have enough data, they really question, have you done this? Is it there? To where they might be like, there's someone else who got really in the details and in the weeds. And so we know they did it. So there is a fine line, interesting portion here that makes a difference with that, I would say. But the readability of it all, is it smooth? Does it make sense? Is it telling the story I want it to tell? That's pertinent as well. The other piece with the aesthetic that I would say, and this is something I highly suggest you do if you've ever been at a company long enough to have some form of trajectory, but always, as much as you can, show trajectory in whatever roles that you've worked in. The reason being is that signals an excellent cue to the manager that not only have you made it in the door of an organization, but they liked your work so much that they wanted you to do more. They wanted you to promote you. They wanted you to take on more things. And as silly as it may be, because there are people who work for a company for 20 years and they're like, well, I've got to make my resume one page. Thus, I'll just say 20 years in this one position. I actually don't necessarily suggest that. Not saying that you need to put every single year that you were promoted or changed, but just to show some form of trajectory that you were not stagnant for 20 years, that in fact you were promoted, you took over different things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have a paragraph for each time you moved, but just something to show that whenever you're brought in the door of somewhere, they want more of you. So anytime that you've actually had that occur in a business, I would highly suggest adding that trajectory and timeline to your resume to show that. The third part with the aesthetic is going to be the impact. So again, whenever we're talking about relevancy and prioritization, how you actually assemble that on a page will matter. There are lots of people who write resumes that they only put in chronological order. That's not necessarily wrong, but it is very traditional. And whenever we know the statistics of the audience that are reading our papers, there is something to be said about wanting to change that. So we at Resume Writing oftentimes will write what's called a functional resume, meaning we've tailored it to the actual skill set that the individual is wanting to be hired for. And because of that, it is automatically tailored so that way, any time that they apply for a job that matches the quest that they're on, which is majority, their resume is tailored to that. So I would say making sure that the aesthetic creates impact in the sense that you don't necessarily have to go in order to make sure that, you know, your experience that's relevant in tech is on there, but it's at the very bottom. It's okay to not do the exact timeline and actually make it to where everything the reader needs to read is put on the paper in a way that says, hey, this is what I've done. These are the years. It's a little out of order, but I need you to know these are the important aspects that are the transferable skills to your open role. So the way that you set up the relevance and prioritization is really important, and you can do that within the aesthetic itself. And if you do it well, you can have that, you know, kind of communicate what you're needing to the party. One thing I will say, and this is the hill I will die on probably, and that is beating an ATS. There are so many TikTok videos about you need to put keywords in white and you need to beat an ATS and it needs to be this font. And if it's not this font, XYZ, I can tell you I have been a product liaison with several ATSs. I will say if you have an individual talking to you about keywords, chances are high that they were either in staffing or are perhaps referring to things like Indeed and Career Builder, where you're running Boolean strings and recruiters are finding you through keyword searches. Whenever we're talking about an ATS, that is typically used for corporation and organizations that are hiring internally, and it's only a tracking system. There's actually a lot of nuances with ATSs that are created that way specific so they don't have compliance issues. So I say all this to say there are lots of TikTok rumors about how you should do crazy different things to your resume because you need to beat the ATS. I will tell you right now, if a company is using an ATS, it is typically probably a human that will be rejecting you. There are knockout rules. There is a lot of machine learning and AI that is starting to incorporate its way into an ATS. But again, due to compliance, HR issues and things like that, what we see is a lot of ATSs creating a back-end CRM or a back-end feature so they can do some of these things. But I do just want to address some of these false rumors of, you know, it needs to be a Word doc in exactly Roman 12-inch font, things like that. Those are actually contrary to what I would suggest. I almost always suggest a PDF. You don't want to give people your information and let it be editable to them. I learned that in staffing. People do crazy things with people's resumes online that are willy-nilly. If it has your address, your phone, all of these things, you really don't want to do that and make it editable for the world. So I say all this to say, if you're going to take any advice on resumes, please just ask them how much HR or talent experience they have directly in the field, booty and chair, and then whatever amount of years, use that as the multiplier for how much you listen to whatever they say next. That's probably my best suggestion. Last suggestion for the resumes, and then we can take a quick Q&A break before we pop into interviews. If you really, really want the job, and I've been in recruiting for almost 15 years, and I will say buckets of people will reach out to you all the time, but and some recruiters will even say, oh, that frustrates me, la-di-da-di. I don't know a single recruiter who doesn't get reached out to that at the very least still looks up the person in the ATS to see what their thing looks like. They may not even respond via LinkedIn, but I can tell you right now that if you really, really just want to be looked at, it doesn't mean that you'll get the job, but I can tell you majority of recruiters, if you send them a message, we may not respond to you on LinkedIn. We may not immediately send you a message to interview or to reject, but I can guarantee you the moment they get that ping, they look because they're like, oh, this person's actually really interested. And always remember, the recruiter has the same goals as you do. They want to fill the role, and good recruiters really want to fill it with the right match and a good fit. So like I said, there are some recruiters that are in the game for different reasons to where that might be flustering to them. But to us, people reaching out to us is occasionally a problem solving. There's so many candidates that I've been able to place because they reached out to me and were like, hey, you missed me, I'm a fit. And boy, were they right, because we're all humans and that's just the way it goes. So I would say if it's something that you really want and you genuinely feel like you're a fit, do follow up. Try your best, just shoot your shot. The whole world's going to tell you no, so no need for you to tell you no first. Go ahead and just send in the app and then do the follow-up. The reason I call it a follow-up though, always send in the application first. I cannot tell you how many people have reached out to me and are like, should I apply? We won't necessarily take the look to go look at your LinkedIn to see if you should apply, but I will look at people who have already applied and followed up. So I do feel like that's a key distinction. And so just real quick, I'm going to switch over in here to see if there's anything in the chat. Oh, there's things. Okay, cool. We will share the recordings, post them on YouTube. What about making your resume ageless? So it's an excellent question. I will say two things. There's one side of this where I can give advice, and I will, which is going to be things like, you're going to remove some dates. You're going to take away your college graduation date. If you have things that are over like 15 or 20 years old, I would just put, additional experience area and maybe not even put dates if you're really wanting to get ageless. I will say though, someone once asked me this question whenever I very first started recruiting, and I was also a panel speaker, and that was the advice I gave. And I'll be honest, I was less than a year in recruiting. I had no business on that stage. And a gentleman said, okay, I can remove all of those things, but am I really going to work for a company that doesn't want to know who I really am, that doesn't want to take all of the experience as I have as a whole? And do I really want to put myself in that environment? Now, I will say it was an excellent point and an excellent question. It is kind of privileged because I will say there are some that are like, I don't care, I need a job. So that's why I say there are two ends of this, which is why I don't mind providing the advice. But I do want to say that thought process has never left me. So just making sure, like I said, our job is a perfect match. And that doesn't go away even if you're a resume writer, because it's instilled in you from recruiting. So I will say that's the only thing I would say about making it ageless, is just keep in mind that as much as you're eliminating you, and you're going to have to go there with your full self every day. So just consider the environment. What if you're in a career transition, but you have a trajectory story in your past career? Should you include it? For example, I'm an urban planner transitioning to software engineering. I did work I would consider to be technical, but it's not programming. So that's an excellent question. So if you are doing a career switch, this is where I like to call the translation piece, right? So, in your work as an urban planner, what were the aspects that you would have said were technical? What were the pieces? What were the tools? What was, I don't know if there would necessarily be a tech stack, but okay, maybe. Um, and what were the things that you did that are specifically relevant to programming? So whenever you think of urban planner, I don't know this all the way, but I think of like city planning and like different things with budgeting and things like that. Those are not the elements I would mention when I'm trying to transition into programming. I want to take out everything that speaks programming language and highlight that. And whenever I say programming language, I mean like things that are important to them, not the actual programming language like Python or something. So I say all of this to say your job whenever you are transitioning is to be a translator, because the recruiters can't, they won't, I don't want to say they can't, but they won't do it for you. So the biggest task you have there is to take everything that you believe to be relevant and translate it into a way that makes it make sense for someone who is assessing for programming. Hopefully that makes sense. Can we not use dates or if graduated or not? I think dates should be dropped. Years of employment is still needed. Yeah, so again, it's really up to your discretion. Um, this is another thing I would say. I sometimes make two resumes. Make one that's exactly how you think it should be, and then make one that's kind of like, you know what, I'm actually going to take off all these dates. I'm going to do this a little differently, and then start sending that one out. I actually knew of a candidate, and this is just to show how biases work, that every single time would actually apply with both. And I will tell you right now, I rejected one and I accepted the other, and I didn't notice it was the same person. And and the moment that I saw it, I was like, wait, I just rejected this person. And then I realized, oh, they actually gave two different resumes, and I was aesthetically more pleased with this one, even though the content was the same. And so good recruiters, they'll pick up on these biases, but I say this to say recruiters are biased. And if you know that, combat it with the knowledge that you have. So I say all this to say, not necessarily that you should be applying twice to every job. That's not what I'm trying to say. But if you have concerns that maybe you are experiencing disparity due to one feature or another, such as ageism, I would highly suggest make a resume that completely is agnostic of it, that follows exactly what you think is happening to you, and send that out and see if you get any difference. I've been a research statistician and developer for behavioral research for a while. So for me, this is a love language. For y'all, that might not seem like fun, but it's something that I will say as you kind of start dipping your toes in the water of seeing what the market is like, how are you being received? If you do feel a notion in your gut, course correct, try again. Again, the world will tell you no need for you to do that yourself. Okay, I think, oh, what about education? Is there a rule of thumb if it should be at the top or the bottom? That's a great question. I would say it depends on what the company said. If they just said we need a few years experience, made no relevance to education whatsoever, then I would say it's probably not that relevant. There are companies that say it is a bachelor's degree required. Whenever terms are required, that means the first thing the recruiters are looking for are those easy check boxes, because if those aren't hit, then it doesn't matter. So I would say, based on the relevancy of how they've made the job description, which it is typically pretty clear in requirements or like nice to haves or whatever that may be, then I would tailor it based on that. Again, I know I'm suggesting this and you're like, oh my God, I got to do this for every single one. No, you can make one with it at the top, one with it at the bottom, save the files under the different names, and you have them for the rest of your time. Especially right now in this job market, it is not cute. There are so many highly qualified people in this saturated market to where having a resume Rolodex, although it sounds tedious, it's a decent investment of time right now, because you can apply to 100 jobs non-tailored and you might get one call back, or you can spend the time creating a small Rolodex that has maybe 5 or 6 different types that you're like, this is exactly what I want. I would take any variance of this, because there will come a point on your job search where you're just like, I'll take anything that's kind of related. And so essentially, sorry, I just saw another message come in. I got distracted, but man, I was on a roll. Sorry, guys. That's why I can't look at this thing while we talk. But essentially, I would just say create the Rolodex, use that. Please don't ever apologize. I looked at that piece too. I love the chat back, so please, it's my own woes. But yes, I would say invest just a smidge bit of time in creating the Rolodex so that way every time you're putting in these application efforts, you're doing it with one that will actually maybe catch the eye. Like you're investing maybe 2 days in creating this Rolodex, and it should get you past that 30-second draw. I was recently told by a recruiter that they couldn't send my resume along to a company that was hiring developers because I didn't say I had worked with React on an enterprise level. I was thinking about creating an LLC and use React for the website and then add that to my resume as a case study or something. Would you recommend? No matter how many times I tell them, told me the client is adamant. So I will say if it's a client that's adamant, it maybe sounds like that was probably a staffing org. I will say, and I don't know that that's true, so I apologize if I say that. And it necessarily wasn't. But just because they're using the term client, I will say sometimes with those recruiters, because the client has reached out to them as a vendor, one, that means their internal, whatever function it may have been, couldn't do it. Two, the vendor's job is to do exactly to a T. So I will say that mentality of, I understand you have this, but they want specifically this, please don't take that hit upon yourself. Give yourself grace. That has nothing to do with you. That is just the life of someone representing a client. The other thing that I would say, I don't even think you need to start an LLC. I have known so many individuals that have done boot camps, that have done personal projects, that have done other things like that they put on a resume. And I didn't find out these were unpaid gigs until I had them on the phone. So they passed the 30 seconds, they passed it to get scheduled, and now we're in the process of going through the door. So what I would actually say, and we're going to get into this whenever we talk about interviewing, just make your own opportunity, especially with programming and coding. It's something that if you want to take it on and do it on your own, you totally can. Like recruiting, I can't really just go home and be like, I'm gonna go practice this on my own. But this is a nice niche type of skill set where you kind of can. And it's one of those rare skills to where taking proactive autonomy in this learning space is something that's really, really good. So I would actually say you have a unique opportunity to be able to add to that skill set Rolodex. You're just going to have to do it autonomously. So I would say yes. I don't know that you need an LLC. I never asked anyone if they had it, but I would just say doing projects, relevant projects, pick the job you want and be like, what is it that they're doing? I'm going to go create it too. And then I can reference everything that they've used. Okay, last one here, and then I'm going to switch into the interviews. If I started a master's in computer science but couldn't finish for various reasons, but I have relevant courses, how do I display that? I'm trying to transfer into software development and don't have prior experience. That's excellent. So, well, not excellent, but excellent question. And so what I would say for this is if you have not finished, there are a few ways to handle this. One, you can always write, and I don't want to say always write, I do want to say lean on what is accurate and true from what I'm going to say. So like if I'm saying do this doesn't mean make it up and lie. Only do if it's real. But I would say if you are still like in the moves of perhaps potentially getting that master's, you can always write like estimated graduation date or continuing studying or things like that if you're wanting it to seem like you're still at that level and attending. Now, if you've 100% quit, you're not going back, no questions asked, and you want to be able to utilize what experience you did learn in those courses while you had them and translate that to your resume, what I would say is actually usually whenever you get like your syllabus guide for those courses, there's a title, but then there's also kind of this summary of like the objectives of what you'll learn through this course. You can literally take those objectives and make them kind of your resume bullet points. And again, if you're writing a functional resume where we're talking about skill set rather than chronological order, logo, and title label, then what you're able to do is translate that in a way that is relevant to software development. I don't know that that will cover everything because it is education, but it's something to where you can say, I've been educated in these areas. And then again, if you wanted to put it into practice, programming and coding is something where you could do that as well, and you could align those with custom and maybe personal projects and things like that. All right, cool beans. We are going to go into interviewing, which is, I believe, our last piece. Okay, interview rules. This slide does not look as cute as it did whenever I made it. I'm sorry. The first thing I will say, most of the time you're going to have an interview that is typically, hopefully, usually sight unseen, but some form of like a phone or a qualification type interview, usually with a recruiter, someone that's going to go over just the bare bones of your resume, make sure that it matches. Sometimes this could be via Zoom, sometimes this could be via phone. The reason that I put tone as the number one thing is because we care about the content that you're saying. That's what we're paying attention to. However, your content can be excellent, but if your delivery of that content is what an old manager of mine used to call energy sucking, then they will not want you on the team. One thing that I learned whenever I was taught to smile and dial in like 2012 with recruiting was you should always talk with a smile on the phone. And I always thought it was weird because I was like, that's nutty. But there is something to be said whenever you do smile, it does change the tone, like physically does, to where I remember us testing this at a recruiting boot camp. And it actually makes the other person on the phone believe for you to have like a higher self-efficacy and contentment. So I will say, as much as content is important, which we discussed with the resume, the tone and delivery of that content once you get into the interview space is important. How excited are you? How do you talk about your previous employers? I can't tell you how many managers have disqualified people from interviewing further on in the process because whenever they got on the phone and they were like, why, what happened to your last role? What is this? They just, regardless of the validity, could not get past it enough to not have a negative connotation about their previous role. Again, not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm saying this is their perception. And so tone does really matter. The other thing, relevancy in the interview as well. Every time you get interviewed, a good recruiter should be sending you a list of who will be in that interview. Knowing who they are, what their title is, what they are in charge of is very, very important because you will get these people for 1 hour. If I have someone for 1 hour and they try to talk to me about astronauts and moon boots, the the odds of me having interest, retaining anything like that is slim because I don't know much about astronauts and moon boots. However, if you have a conversation with me about what is relevant to me, now that conversation has changed. The way I feel about the conversation has changed, and the way I will assess this conversation has changed because now it's relevant. Now I'm assessing something I'm knowledgeable about. So what I mean by that is not that you all would go into talking about moon boots at an interview, but what I mean is if you're going to be interviewed by a CFO, they care about numbers. If you're going to be interviewed by someone in HR, they care about operations and people. If you're getting interviewed by someone who's in engineering, they want to know your technical aptitude. They want to know how do you manage tech debt? How do you, like, you want to speak the language of the person that you will be speaking with. And so relevancy within the interview matters as well. The other things that I would say, we'll come back to thank you notes here in a moment. Arrival. I will say in the past, so many interviews were in Zoom since 2020. People are going back to in person. I've also worked for companies where even though it was Zoomed, they had an admin that would meet you in the Zoom room first. I say all of this to say that anytime you greet any spokesperson or any individual from the company that might not be your interviewer, but is helping and assisting facilitate, please, 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 they are an interview all of their own. I have to tell you, especially whenever we worked in person, I worked for a Fortune 500 org, and every single time after we had an interview, I would go to our front desk admin, who was the one that would sit with them in the waiting room and get them whatever they needed until we were ready. And every single time I would ask her, which one of these would you hire? And every single time, I never communicated what she would tell me to the managers, just kept it to myself. Every single time she was accurate. And the reason why is because, and by accurate, I mean she called who the managers did actually end up picking. And the reason why is because she could tell in how they treated someone who maybe wasn't to their status, kind of the intel of the person. Whenever someone shows you who they are, believe them. And it's kind of that theology. So I say all this to say, don't think that just because someone is not your exact interviewer, that that is not a part of this interview. It 100% is. And I can tell you, I, as an individual, so much value those that, even though other people may think they're not of the same status, their input matters to people in HR, because these individuals will be who, fish rots from the head. And if they're going to be the head, we need to make sure that that works for all people at all different stratifications of the business. All right. The other thing that I would say, and this is probably the most important thing that I could teach you today, if anything at all, and that is something that we call at resume writing proactive autonomous learning. This is going to be a major key for all of you. Anytime you go into an interview, and it is for a job where perhaps you do not have the most experience, you perhaps have not used the tech stack, you have not used the specific tools, etc. I highly suggest that you do our PAL, Proactive Autonomous Learning. And let me give you an example of what that means. The conference platform that we're on right now is based through a company called Bevy. I was reached out to be their head of talent, and whenever I was being interviewed, I learned that they used an ATS that was called Greenhouse. I had used several other ATSs. I had never used Greenhouse. So what did I do in preparation for my first interview? I downloaded a demo of Greenhouse. I looked up YouTube videos, and I created what would just be centric questions as to how they operate in Greenhouse. Do you do all of these people as admin? Do something to create a small dialogue about this one piece of tech that was very important to them, because the head of talent also had no idea how to operate Greenhouse, that whomever sat in this seat knew how to do it. I was the only applicant who had never used Greenhouse out of all the people that they pulled together. I was also the only one that they hired. And the reason for that being, and what they had told me was, you had no idea about Greenhouse, but you went, you sought out how to do it. You made us aware of the fact that you proactively did this. And so we knew that if we had to hand this to you and say, go run, you would be able to do that. And so I share this example because PAL was something that was taught to me as far as something that I learned in college. Because whenever you're a college graduate and you graduate with your degree and you have your internship and all these other things, and everybody applies for that first year job, eventually all of the candidates will come out flush, meaning that their skill set, their graduation, their internship, everything will come out flush at one point, where it's like, we're just picking our favorite now out of the same pan. And so the question becomes, how do you differentiate yourself from that pack? How do you stand above? And PAL was what was taught to us as this thing of, do this small act, make sure that they're aware that you do it, and make sure that they know that you did this on your own proactively, and do it with several things throughout the process. And essentially what you're teaching them is that you are a better applicant and candidate for this role because you've used minimal words and I've completely submersed you with everything that you've needed already before employment. My work ethic is now viewed differently than anyone else's. So I share this story just to say it's something that, especially as you're transitioning, and how I said, hey, make your own projects, do your own things. It can be something as small as just a demo. It doesn't have to be creating your whole universe. So just show them in some ways that whenever it all comes out flush, how will they separate me? That's your pal. That's what you need to find. Last and final things, and then we'll pop back into questions. Gratitude. I know that this sounds weird. And honestly, for a while, I actually hated giving this advice because I think it made it hiring managers toot their own horn. But I will say it's something that has helped me greatly along my journey, and that is gratitude. And I know that that sounds weird, again, because it's like, thank you so much for taking time to interview me, even though I went to school and got an $80,000 loan and I'm just hoping to get a job. Like, it was wonk. But I will say there's something to be said about the fact that manners can get you where money and connections maybe won't. And there have been times, again, similarly to the situation at Bevy, I don't know that I was the most qualified candidate for that role because there were tools that I was unfamiliar with. However, the whole time throughout the process, I was just like, hey, I'm just thankful y'all are taking the time to talk to me, hear about me, and like see if I'm a fit for you guys. Like, just thanks. Like, it was something that was small, authentic, but was like, I'm thankful for your time. And again, I don't say this so that way hiring managers can be seen as gods or things, but I say this to say it's one of those ways that you can stick out above the pack because gratitude is not something that's shared often in an office all the time, especially when talking about work. But it's something that we see as a practice in science that actually makes people feel more at peace whenever they leave the situation, to where whenever you end your interviews on this, it's just like a hey, like thanks for hanging out and learning about me today. Like whatever happens next, I'm glad we had this. That is something that creates a tie that, again, your goal is to set yourself above the pack. That will do it. Last thing, final and foremost, and then we're going to Q&As. And I feel like I'm saying a lot on this. I think someone also said this was recording, so I'm already highly embarrassed. Last and foremost is a thank you note. Again, this is not to make hiring managers get Rudy Tooty and toot their horns, but it is something to say that I do have seen and heard of many managers who are like, I'll wait to make my decision until I see if they send me a thank you note. I don't know, I don't believe that that is necessarily a good practice as far as for managers go. Again, but it's something that exists. And I think I would be remiss to not tell prospective candidates that there are some managers that make decisions based on how the candidates follow up to give their holistic view and assessment of that interview. So I say all of that to say, just to share a little tidbit. But I think I'm going to stop sharing and I am going to hop into these chats. Okay. Do you list those personal projects under experience or project section? Okay, this is a great question. And I will say there's a mix of this. So, all right, I'm going to tell you my answer and then I'll tell you probably the ethical answer. My answer is make them call and find out. This is a game. Like the biases in hiring, the things that happen, you just have to play the game. So in my mind, if it is a one-sheeter slick to make me say I'm the best, I want you to have to call me to find out why I'm not. And if that means that you think that this project is less than because it was unpaid, then you can tell me that over the phone. Again, I'm saying this, there are probably recruiters out there that are like, girl, no way. But the way that resumes are organized are just based on social constructs and norms. It's based on what recruiters think is important. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? So if that is the true goal, then let's kind of strip away all these weird nuances and say, okay, what do I need to put on this paper that gets me in that door and gets me a call? So I will say there are some people that are like ethical boundaries. No, you must say this was a project and it was unpaid. I say, yes, you say it was a project and unpaid after they pick up the phone and call you to find that out. Because I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed, found that out, but after interviewing, they were so phenomenal that I was like, we would be absolutely remiss. All they needed was their 15 minutes and they could make it. And so with resumes, that's really what I try to teach. Your goal is to make it past the 30 seconds and get your 15 minutes. That's it. That's all you need with resumes. If you can do that, then that does the trick. So I know the advice that I'm giving is kind of like, I don't know. There aren't any rules. And again, this is a game. It's social norms that say only relevant experience can say paid. We need a different section. I say it's all truth once you separate it for them and then they can decide. But if they're looking for the skill set and an outcome-based performer, if you have the skills to do that, I would list it. Again, take that response how you will. They told me the same thing when I was selling insurance. Same, I would do this all the time. I don't know what that means. I don't know what we're talking about in these. Do you have any resources to prep for tech assessments? Great question. I had my first one this week and I got through the next step, but it wasn't a very impressive score. Great question. I'm curious who hosted your assessments. I have worked previously with Woven. And so there are a few resources. One thing that I would say about the tech assessment process that you have to think of, there are internally hosted tech assessments like that an organization's internal talent team builds. And then there are kind of like these third-party vendor assessments, which would be more like more like Woven, sorry. And two of those are kind of different. The reason that I say that is to prepare for a vendor assessment. I would actually say the biggest thing you need is just to practice test taking, which I know sounds weird, but the apprehension, because it's like in recruiting, I don't have to take a test. Like this is not a part, like it's not not that it's not normal. Let me rephrase the way I'm saying this. It's not something that happens in every single skill set that you get tested. So I will say there is something to be said about learning how to test, because it's something that can help you in the long run, especially for these vendor proctored assessments where there's someone usually watching you on the other screen and things like that can just be nerve-wracking. Learning how to go through the process of that, so that way that becomes a controlled stimulus, and then the only thing you have to worry about are the varying questions that can help you with the vendor side. For an internal assessment that's created by the organization or the HR, it's really going to be dependent on the org. One thing I will say, and to always kind of think about, most of these organizations, they need to have some form of validation for their assessments. So if you ever want to ask them, like, if for any reason you did get rejected, you could always be like, hey, like, could I see what it is to see what is good or where I could have changed things? And I would say that request might be the best way to get feedback to start tailoring how you approach technical assessments that are organizationally created. Okay, hold on. So do you mean put relevant unpaid experience in most jobs and remove section indicators? Not necessarily. So the way that I've done it in the past is I just write relevant experience. I don't, like, that's it, just relevant. I don't put unpaid or paid, nothing like that. And then I put in exactly based on what they're looking for, what experience is the most relevant, and then I put that in order based on what their job description has. So if their biggest thing is sourcing and closing hires, then I would put my 2 functional data points up at the top of that. The reason that I highly suggest, I would take out vocabulary, the words like work experience, professional, always just use relevant experience and then additional experience. Additional experience are ones that maybe like, if the timeline was to not make sense, like if it's out of order and something like that, it's like, yeah, if you need my timeline, here it is. Here are all the things that were in between. But these are the 3 relevant jobs in my 20 years of experience that really are going to matter to you. And I say jobs, but again, these could have been projects. These could have been different things. And again, I say you make them call you to find out anything to get in the door. And again, I know that that may sound, there's like a weird ethical bound using relevant work experience versus, I don't know, professional and things like that. But I would just say it's all about just getting the call. Okay. As someone who created content and has grown multiple personal platforms, social media over 100K people platforms, wow, 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 with engagement over 800K, would that be something I would leave on or off my resume? It would explain my break. So I would say first thing, is that skill set relevant to what you're looking for? That's the first question. Is everything that you just provided to me there something that would be relevant to based on the jobs that you're applying and who would be assessing you? Do those skills matter? If so, yes, include it. If they do not, then I would say that activity that you did, try to draw out things in it that are relevant to who would assess you, and then translate that. So for instance, you did 100K community with engagement of over 800,000 people. What were the technical expertises that you had to have in there? What were the tech stacks that you use? How did you manage and how did you what's the word for whenever you are over a community? Moderate. How did you do these things? How did you accomplish them? What were the technical aspects of that? That's what I would say to draw out. Again, you want to pull out what's important and then translate. Okay. My recruiter gave me some good feedback. That's good. I've heard that LeetCode as a resource, technical skill they will provide. That's perfect. Yeah, and that's another thing I would say. There are a lot of resources to be able to do some coding practices. There, and some of them are even hosted by the organization. So things like Woven and stuff like that. There are also lots of boot camps that can assist as well. But yeah, and any other questions, you all? I would love to answer anything. I don't even know. Anything that y'all have about hiring, resumes. The biggest thing I would say is just remember right now the market is a little cuckoo bananas. Please give yourself some grace. Know that the market is saturated. I can't say that enough. I know so many individuals who are so highly qualified, best in their class, and 6 months going on 7 looking for a role. So it's not easy right now. So I would just say, give yourself grace, take a deep breath. You know your value, you know your skill set. It's all just about translation. It's about translation in front of the right person, sending the right message. Okay, are you able to connect with me after? Yes, please. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Look at me. So if anyone needs any assistance with resume writing, we have full on service. We do interview preps, we do LinkedIn writings, anything like that. So resumewriting.com is the website. I also there's Calendly if you need that. The other things that I would say, and let me put these two in there. So we do have resume writers that can help you. And then, it did go in there, but it's all kind of mushied. So that is my LinkedIn. And then the second one is our new organization that we have begun that will be starting or launching the product in March. And this is for talent and HR professionals. But I see that it is past 1 here, and I cannot thank you all enough for joining. It was an absolute pleasure. You had excellent questions, and I wish every single one of you the absolute best luck on the job market. Yeah, thank you all. I don't know what happens next. I could do a small stand-up. Just kidding. I think Katie's gone. Let's see.